Today, let us take some time to share the words of God with a sermon titled, Apart from God, we cannot live. In the book of Genesis, we can see the record of how God created the world. Let us take a close look at some distinctive points. Where did God look when He created fish? God said, "Let the water teem with fish and other living creatures." In the beginning, when God created fish, He spoke these words to the water. What about when He created trees? Where did He look? He spoke to the land. "Let the land produce trees that bear fruit with seed in it." When God created fish, He spoke to the water. And when He created trees, He looked at the land. Then, when God created mankind, where did He direct His gaze? Everyone, sometimes we read the Bible carelessly and often assume that we know everything. When God created mankind, whom did He look at? God Elohim looked at each other. And they said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness." Didn't they? While they created mankind, God Elohim looked at each other, not the land or the water. God the Father and God the Mother looked at each other. Everyone, this has a significant meaning here. When God created fish, He looked at the water and He spoke to it. If a fish were to leave water, what would be the result? The fish would be destined to die. God created environments tailored for the creatures at the places where He directed His gaze. What would happen to a tree if it were uprooted and eventually left the land? The tree would never be able to survive. To put it simply, it would die. A fish dies when it leaves the water, and a tree dies when it leaves the land. If we think of this question, where did God look and what did He say? We can understand that when creating mankind, God Elohim looked at each other. God said, "Let us create mankind in our image," and created male and female. Please remember this significant phrase. God looked at each other at that moment. When creating fish, God looked at the water and gave His words. When creating trees, God spoke to the land. Then, when creating mankind, God Elohim looked at each other. This implies that God plays the same role to us as that of the land to the trees and the water to the fish. Then, what will become of us humans if we are apart from God? We absolutely cannot live. A tree cannot survive apart from the land, and a fish cannot survive apart from the water. This was God's creation work in the beginning. Likewise, can mankind survive apart from God? This means that mankind can never live without God. Therefore, since life can only exist with God the Father and God the Mother, we must always be connected to them. Everyone, please read the history of creation in Genesis today. It is truly amazing. Where is God's gaze directed? God created a home for fish, a home for trees, and a home for mankind to live in. However, what happens if the creatures leave their homes? A world of death awaits them. That is why mankind cannot live apart from God. How joyful and happy we are that we can live within God. Today, let us confirm this one by one through the history of the Bible. First, let's take a look at Jesus' teaching in the Gospel of John, chapter 15, verse 5. John chapter 15, verse 5. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me, and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, what happens to us when we are apart from God? You can do nothing. There is no joy in life apart from God. It's meaningless and empty. Everything is fleeting, and joy is only temporary. Even if we attain what we are pursuing, that happiness cannot be sustained. God said, apart from me, you can do nothing. This was God's plan when He created mankind. God created mankind as beings who cannot live apart from Him. Yet people ignorantly claim there is no God, or boast about themselves, saying useless words such as, instead of believing in God, believe in my strength. Believing God cannot help you. When such people face illness, they ponder, am I going to die? What if I die? Where will I go when I die? Life is truly meaningless. Indeed, we come empty-handed and leave empty-handed. It is then that they realize the foolishness of their thoughts. There is no hope, joy, or reason for existence in a life apart from God. Regarding this principle, Jesus said, apart from me, you can do nothing. Ultimately, leaving Jesus means leaving God, and leaving God is the same situation where a fish leaves water. How joyful and happy it is to be in God, and God the Father, and God the Mother. It seems that we are often unaware of this in our daily lives. When God created the heavens and the earth, He already designated the conditions in which mankind could enjoy the most happiness, sustain their life, and experience the joy of life. Let us confirm that mankind can have the happiest moments and live a life full of gratitude when they are with God. Let's take a look at Deuteronomy chapter 7. In Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 4, it is written, for they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods, and the Lord's anger will burn against you and will quickly destroy you. Here, turning away from God is like a fish leaving water. Then it will experience the tremendous pain of death. In the parable of the prodigal son, when the prodigal son left his father's house, he expected to be filled with overflowing joy. However, what happened? It is the same as when a fish leaves water. Pain followed him. He wanted to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs ate, but even that was not allowed. Then he realized, if I continue like this, I will starve to death. In my father's house, even the servants are not as miserable as I am. When he left, it was the same as going toward death. However, how did he feel when he returned? Suppose that a fish leaves water for a while and returns to the water. It will realize that water is the best place. How happy it will be. How joyful would that life be? Everyone, when we carefully look at the providence of God, who created the heavens and the earth, we can fully understand what kind of life brings us the most happiness, can't we? Thus, in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 4, it is written, "Whoever turns away from God will be destroyed in the end." Let us take a look at the book of Judges chapter 16 as an example. In the book of Judges chapter 16, the story of Samson and Delilah is recorded. In the Bible, it is written that Samson was a Nazirite who had been dedicated to God from his mother's womb. However, he was seduced by a beautiful woman named Delilah and eventually violated God's commandments as a Nazirite. Let's take a look at chapter 16, verse 20. Then she called, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." The Philistines devised a scheme with Delilah, saying, "Please tell us the source of Samson's strength. If you do that, we will give you a lot of silver." To put it simply, she received money and asked Samson about the source of his power. He did not tell her the truth at first. He said, "If anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I will lose my strength." However, it turned out that this was not true. Then he said, "If anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I will lose my strength." However, this was also not true. Therefore, Delilah persistently implored him day and night, saying, "Please tell me the true source of your strength in all sincerity." There are 3 essential commandments for the Nazirites to follow in dedicating their life to God. God gave the law to the Nazirites. Let's read the book of Numbers, chapter 6, verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, if a man or a woman wants to make a special vow, a vow of dedication to the Lord as a Nazirite, they must abstain from wine. First, Nazirites must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine, not even the seeds. Secondly, Nazirites must not go near a dead body. Third, if Nazirites make a vow to God that they would live in this way for a year, they must not use a razor on their head. This means that they must not cut their hair. Samson was a Nazirite who dedicated his whole life to God. However, he told Delilah the secret. Then she shaved off his hair while he was sleeping. Since Samson disobeyed the law of the Nazirites, it is written that the Spirit of God had left him. Let's turn back to Judges chapter 16. Let us understand the regulation of the law of the Nazirites in the Old Testament and read this scene again. Samson came to violate God's law by telling Delilah the source of his strength. As a result, his eyes were gouged out. When God departed Samson, everything became painful. The history of Samson teaches us such a lesson. Let us move to chapter 16, verse 20. Verse 20. Then she called, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He woke up from his sleep and thought, "I'll go out as before and shake myself free." But he did not know. What did he not know? Samson did not know that the Lord had left him. When a fish is in water, it is strong. It is quick, and it has the ideal conditions and environment to do anything it desires. However, a fish out of water cannot do as it pleases. It needs to breathe through its gills, but is unable to survive in a space where breathing air through lungs is required. Likewise, Samson struck down thousands of Philistines just by using a donkey's jawbone. However, after God left him, Samson became nothing but an ordinary person among many. Verse 21. Then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding grain in the prison. But the hair on his head began to grow again, after it had been shaved. What is important here is that God had left him. When God created mankind, where did he look? Didn't God Elohim look at each other? When God created fish, he spoke toward the water. When he created trees, he looked toward the land. The happiest moment for a tree is when it has its roots in the ground. A tree with its roots barely hanging on is in pain from that moment. Eventually, as time passes, the tree has no choice but to die. It is the same with us. Please think about Samson or Judas Iscariot, who betrayed God. Anyone who is apart from God is like a fish that leaves water. They may breathe for a moment, but it cannot last long. The pain will become worse and worse. Everyone, when God created us, Father looked toward Mother, and Mother looked at Father, saying, "Let us make mankind in our image." Since God Elohim looked at each other, what is the most optimal environment for us? It is God. When creating human beings, God Elohim looked at each other and created them. Thus, we must never leave God. I will leave God and try living happily. I will go into the world and indulge in reckless and dissolute living. In reality, it will never work that way. This is why the words of the Bible are the truth. Since all things will be fulfilled according to these words, we should always be joyful in God, enjoy happiness in God, and give thanks to God. Please think of the case of Samson, who was distracted by a woman. He revealed how to break God's law. No razor may be used on your head. As a result, his hair was shaved off, and both of his eyes were gouged out. He was in a miserable state. When God was with him, he was so powerful that no other warrior could stand against him. However, what happened when the Spirit of God left him? He became nothing. We must remain in God. Let us realize that the moment when we can always abide in God's commandments, teachings, and God Himself is the most blessed time for all of us. Let us take a look at 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 1. In 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 1, it is written, "The Lord said to Samuel, 'How long will you mourn for Saul, since I have?'" What did God do? God rejected Saul. Doesn't this mean that God left him? Saul's relationship with God had already been broken. "How long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel?" Why did Saul end up in this situation? In chapter 15, God commanded him to attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all herds and flocks. However, he carried out only half of God's will and disobeyed the other half according to his own thoughts. Since Samuel had anointed Saul as king over the kingdom of Israel, he cherished and loved him dearly. Therefore, Samuel said, "Why did you not obey God?" He told this with a very sad heart. Let's turn to chapter 16, verse 14. In verse 14 it is written, "Now the Spirit of the Lord had," what had it done? "Departed from Saul. And what happened then? An evil spirit from the Lord tormented him." Every night he was tormented by evil spirits and could not control his own mind. After David killed Goliath, the Israelite army entered Jerusalem, singing the victory chant. Then many women sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." Since there was greater praise and admiration for David than for Saul, it made Saul begin to despise David. When the evil spirit arose within Saul, he took up a spear and threw it to kill David. We can see the truly unusual life of Saul in the book of 1 Samuel. What was the reason? What did the Spirit of God do? It is written that the Spirit left him. It is the same situation where the fish leaves water. Once a fish leaves the water, it can no longer control itself from then on. Saul was a king who was faithful to God. However, after living as a king for a long time, he became arrogant. Rather than carrying out God's command faithfully, he used the people as an excuse and followed his own ideas. He partially obeyed God and partially relied on his own thoughts. Ultimately, this is disobedience. As a result, the Spirit of God could no longer be with Saul and departed from him. It is not that God left Saul. It would be better to say that Saul turned away from God. As a result, he came to disobey God's word. After that, Saul went through many painful years. He suffered mental anguish, the pain of jealousy, inferiority because of David, and the torment of being constantly harassed by evil spirits. Eventually, in chapter 31, he and his sons met their deaths in the battle against the Philistines. Let's move on to 1 Samuel chapter 31. Chapter 31, verse 1. Now the Philistines fought against Israel. The Israelites fled before them, and many fell dead on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines were in hot pursuit of Saul and his sons. And they killed his sons Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. The fighting grew fierce around Saul, and when the archers overtook him, they wounded him critically. Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and run me through and abuse me." But his armor-bearer was terrified and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When the armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died with him. As the first king of Israel, he could have been considered remarkable, but he began to disobey and became prideful, exalting himself. All the people and all the military commanders followed his orders faithfully. Then he forgot about God and increasingly let his own thoughts take the lead. Everyone, please remember that in such moments, God departed from Saul. His relationship with God was automatically severed, not because God left him first, but because Saul left him first. The relationship between fish and water and between trees and the earth was broken. After God left him, his life was not going smoothly. In the end, he and his sons also died in the war against the Philistines, and the Israelites suffered a crushing defeat. This marks the tragic end of the record of Saul. Why was all this history from the past written in the Bible? These are a shadow that is written to teach you. Therefore, you should not become like them. Do not be misled by such erroneous examples or fall into fallacy. You must never apart from God. Everyone, in the time of the early church, during the foot washing ceremony, with great significance, Peter said, "Teacher, you shall never wash my feet. I should be the one washing your feet. How could I dare to ask you, God the Creator, to wash my feet? I can never do this." Jesus replied, "Peter, is that so? If you do not let me wash your feet, you will have no part with me." Peter was utterly shocked. "Lord, if that is the case, please do not wash just my feet, but also my hands and my head." Everyone, we must never turn away from God. In the story of Saul, written in the book of 1 Samuel, Saul was truly wise when God was with him. He was brilliant. He diligently kept God's decrees, regulations, and laws. Everything was full of grace, but he began to disobey God's word, one by one. At some point, he did not even follow a truly important direction from God. Eventually, as Saul turned away from God, the Bible tells us that he experienced pain and suffering continuously. Since there are deer, blooming flowers, and brilliant stars on land, the fish jump out of the water thinking, "Let's go on land." From that moment on, they experience pain. They suffer until the moment of death. When God commands us, "Never leave me," it is not because He wants to treat us as servants. As I told you today, this principle is contained in the providence of creation. We can be the happiest when we are in God. We must never turn away from God. We must never leave our father and our mother. Let's continue with the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 13. In chapter 13, verse 1, it says, "If a prophet or one who foretells by dreams appears among you and announces to you a sign or wonder, and if the sign or wonder spoken of takes place, and the prophet says, 'Let us follow other gods, gods you have not known, and let us worship them,' you must not listen to the words of that prophet or dreamer. The Lord your God is testing you to find out whether you love Him with all your heart and with all your soul. It is the Lord your God you must follow, and Him you must revere. Keep His commands and obey Him. Serve Him and hold fast to Him. That prophet or dreamer must be put to death." In the Old Testament times, God even gave such a strict command. Let us see the reason. They must be put to death for inciting. What were they inciting? Rebellion against the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt and redeemed you from the land of slavery. Here, what does inciting rebellion against God mean? They make us leave God. In other words, they separate us from God. If we separate ourselves from God, what will happen to us in our lives? There will be no happiness in them. We will be bound to experience ongoing moments devoid of joy and gratitude. This is why God said, that prophet or dreamer tried to turn you from the way the Lord your God commanded you to follow. You must purge the evil from among you. It is an extremely grave sin to distance others away from God. I should make them take my side and listen to my words more than God's. This is a perilous thought. If we love our brothers and sisters in Zion, where should we make them stay always? Where is the best place for us? Suppose that you love fish. Even though you want to play together with them outside of the water, would you take them out of the water? If you love them, you should first let them stay in water no matter what you want to do with them. In the same way, we should let all our heavenly family members in Zion always look to God. If there is even a slight gap in their relationship with God, and they begin to rely on or follow people instead of God, great misfortunes will begin to befall them. We are created to be the happiest when our lives are within God, who is the source of life. Therefore, Jesus himself came to this earth and said, apart from me, you can do nothing, didn't he? Apart from God, there is nothing we can accomplish properly. True happiness will never come to us. That is why in Deuteronomy chapter 13, it is written that we must mercilessly reject the prophet who tries to make us turn away from God and purge them from amongst us. The Bible even says that prophet or dreamer must be put to death. How serious are these words? In the Gospel of Matthew chapter 7, what did Jesus say about those who practice lawlessness? I never knew you. Away from me, you who practice lawlessness. What does it mean to be away from Jesus? This means you have no blessing of eternal life or the forgiveness of sins. You are already on the verge of eternal suffering. Away from me, you who practice lawlessness. Everyone, if we hear Jesus say, away from me, we should fear those words just as Peter did. However, those who are immature easily leave him. They do such foolish things. We must never turn away from God. The happiest and most joyful moments in human life are when we are in God. Some members leave the church due to worldly things and return later. They came and said, I realized that I was very happy when I was in Zion, under the guidance of our father and mother in the church. I often hear this from the lost sheep. Therefore, we must strive to always live within God's embrace. Who is the God we should be with? Let us all endeavor to dwell in the presence of God the Father and God the Mother. Let's read Revelation chapter 22, verse 17. The Spirit and the bride say, come. And let the one who hears say, come. Let the one who is thirsty come. And let the one who wishes take the free gift of the water of life. In Genesis chapter 1, when creating mankind, God Elohim looked at each other and said, let us create mankind in our image. They played a role as a natural environment for us. Just as God bestowed the sea as a natural environment for the fish and the land for the trees, God gave a natural environment called God for our human lives. So, what does Revelation chapter 22:17, the conclusion of the Bible, say? It is written that all mankind should come to the Spirit and the bride. Throughout their lives, they search and ask, Is there more wisdom in the world? Or is there more knowledge? Or is there greater happiness? Or is there greater joy and pleasure? No matter how thoroughly they examine everything and experience all sorts of things, can anything truly be compared to the joy granted when we are in God's presence? That is why father and mother have called their beloved children in the last chapter of the Bible. Come, all you who are thirsty. Let all who are afflicted come, and all who are broken in spirit. Let them come and be healed in God. Let us go toward the kingdom of heaven hand in hand, leaving no one behind. Who gave us this word? It is God. God draws the fundamental conclusion of mankind. Also, what does Solomon say in the book of Ecclesiastes? Everything is meaningless, but to fear God is the most important duty of mankind. Everyone, realizing this is very important. Some may think, isn't it obvious that we cannot live without God? Yet today, let us engrave this teaching deeply in our hearts once again through the Bible, hoping that on this blessed Sabbath day, the sounds of happiness, delight, and praise in God will never cease. I would like to conclude this sermon. Thank you very much.